Okay, let's dive right into this. If you follow global geopolitics, you know June 2026 was, well, it was a month where the whole world basically held its collective breath, right? We were looking at these rapidly escalating tensions between the United States and Iran. But then, out of nowhere, a massive diplomatic breakthrough actually gave us an off-ramp. So today, in this explainer, we are unpacking the US-Iran peace deal, specifically the 14-point Islamabad MoU, which is this interim framework that completely shifted the geopolitical landscape. To really wrap our heads around this, we've got to ground ourselves geographically first. This document wasn't signed in Geneva or Washington, D.C. It went down on June 17, 2026, in Islamabad. Pakistan actually stepped up as the primary mediator here, dropping right into the middle of this incredible high-stakes standoff to broker the framework. Honestly, just getting both parties to the same table was a historic achievement in and of itself. So here's how we're going to break all this down today. First, we'll define exactly what this MoU is. Then we'll look at halting the conflict, rebuilding the economy, securing the future deal, and finally, the ticking 60-day clock. All right, let's jump straight into part one, defining the MoU. Just what exactly is a Memorandum of Understanding? So the key phrase you really need to keep in mind here is non-binding. You see, an MoU lacks the immediate heavy weight of enforceable international law. Think of it more like a highly formal diplomatic handshake. In a situation where there was literally zero trust and completely broken ties between the US and Iran, jumping straight into a legally binding ironclad treaty, yeah, that was practically impossible. This MoU acts as the crucial groundwork to just build some basic trust first. Moving on to Section 2, halting the conflict, and the immediate de-escalation steps. Now, what's really fascinating about how this deal is structured is how it prioritizes just cooling things off immediately on the ground. How do you stop a war before it explodes? You enforce a physical pause. We're talking a permanent halt to military operations on all fronts, and that includes Lebanon. It also means pulling back on pressure points, like a full removal of the U.S. naval blockade within 30 days. And crucially, it guarantees safe, unrestricted commercial access through the Strait of Hormuz for 60 days. No new military deployments. Basically, everyone just stops moving and maintains the current operational status quo. Okay, Section 3. Rebuilding the economy, focusing on sanctions, trade, and assets. Right after stopping the bullets, the MoU tackles the economic incentives for peace. For Iran, the economic relief laid out here is immediate and it's substantial. First off, they get a freeze on any new U.S. sanctions, plus a progressive termination of existing ones. Then, the vault gets unlocked. There's an immediate unfreezing of Iranian financial assets the second implementation kicks off. And finally, they unlock Iran's main economic engine by issuing U.S. Treasury licenses that allow their oil and petroleum trade to start flowing again. To put that economic commitment into perspective, Point 6 of the agreement mandates a reconstruction and economic development package for Iran worth at least $300 billion. Let that sink in. That is billion with a B. And what's really important to note is that this massive package is supposed to be supported not just by the US, but by a coalition of other nations as well. It acts as this gigantic financial anchor designed specifically to keep the peace process from drifting off course. Let's move to Section 4, securing the future deal. We'll look at oversight and long-term guarantees. So how do they transition this from a temporary handshake to a permanent resolution? Well, both sides have reciprocal obligations. The U.S. commits to freezing sanctions and unfreezing assets, right? In return, Iran makes a huge core commitment, reaffirming no nuclear weapons, with all their nuclear activities staying under strict IAEA supervision. And they aren't just taking each other's word for it. They agreed to establish a joint enforcement monitoring mechanism to police these rules, and they require that any final treaty gets ratified by a binding UN Security Council resolution. That gives the whole thing the actual weight of international law. And finally, Section 5, the 60-day clock, the ticking deadline for a final treaty. When you really zoom out and look at the core philosophy of this framework, it's essentially a structured pause. It's a very calculated bet that taking small, practical steps, gradual de-escalation, can succeed where immediate, sweeping grand bargains have almost always failed in the past. But here's the catch. It comes with a super strict expiration date. They gave themselves a tight 60-day window to transform these 14 points of intent into a binding, permanent reality. Let's map out this incredibly aggressive timeline so you can feel the urgency here. Day 1 is June 17th, 2026, when the ink actually dries in Islamabad. By day 30, they hit the target for the full removal of the U.S. naval blockade. And then by day 60,
two massive things happen. First, the guarantee for unrestricted commercial access in the Strait of Hormuz expires. And second, the absolute hard deadline for a comprehensive final agreement hits. Every single day of this window carries just immense pressure to finalize a treaty before time runs out and everything potentially spirals again.
Which leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? We've walked through the 14 points, we've talked about the mutual concessions, the $300 billion economic package, and the military stand-downs. But at the end of the day, a non-binding handshake only works if both parties can hold on long enough to sign the real thing. So looking at this fragile diplomatic roadmap, the 14-point Islamabad MoU, will that 60-day window actually hold? It is literally a ticking clock with the stability of the entire globe hanging in the balance. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.